Hello and welcome to this episode of the e-commerce practitioners. Today we are joined by Mark Ripley, a PIM and data management expert with experience at various large organizations deploying and rolling out PIM, MDM solutions across the businesses, across especially around the power tools, specific and construction materials. And we are here to learn from Mark. Welcome to the podcast, Mark, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Vikram, and thank you for having me on this today.
It's absolutely a pleasure, Mark. We've had a few conversations and I've really enjoyed the depth of the subject knowledge that you have around this space. So I thought you would carry a lot of latent knowledge and wisdom, which would be very valuable for a lot of people in the industry. Because otherwise you end up getting a lot of shallow words from different people, but it's always good to meet people who have hands-on experience, who've rolled up their sleeves and done it all. Okay, so let's get started, Mark. It would be good to get a bit of your background, and if you could give us a little bit of a color of your background and the experience, and what kind of projects and solutions you've been part of.
Yeah, sure, Vikram. So, yeah, as you say, I feel like I've been around and done quite a bit. Probably this year, I think I'm coming up to a third of a century, mainly focused in retail and resale supply chain. And over that time, I've had a few forays into other areas such as banking and pharmaceutical and telecoms and commodities, but keep coming back to retail and wholesale. And I've been fortunate to work with a lot of major names, major brands, and also, I guess, across the whole of the supply chain, really from manufacturer right through to consumer and beyond in terms of warranty and service and returns and things like that. So it's been, my background is technical, but
Mm-hmm.
I've also worked a lot with the business and a lot of business teams. I've worked with logistics providers, retailers, wholesalers, B2B, B2C. And because I've been doing it for a long time, I started way before e-commerce, the old bricks and mortar stores, high street stores, some of which are no longer around, like Woolworths and Mothercare, but way before people even thought about using the internet. I guess I've kind of done the rounds, got the T-shirt, and I've got quite a few battle scars
Yeah.
along the way.
We can safely say here that your head is a proof enough of a big scar that you've lost all your hair in there.
I'm not sure whether that's work or whether that's marriage and children.
So very true. I'm pretty much on the way to getting there, not very far off. I've got a big moon right on the top of center of my head. I think I'm getting very close to that as well. Anyways, so that's very good to hear, Mark. And if you could, walk us. I talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people tend to confuse PIM and MDM and use them a lot of times interchangeably. There's a lot lack of ambiguity. I would say there's a lot of ambiguity around both these solutions. And interestingly, I spoke to one of the Gartner analysts, and I said, "Okay, tell me." A lot of people keep talking about MDM, but you ask them specifically, they can't give you much detail beyond it. Would be really good to get a sense of that from you.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of confusion. And even some of the projects I've worked on, even deciding what to call the project, whether we call it the PIM or the product MDM or the MDM. And I think in some way, in some areas, they have blurred as well over time, because you'll find that some aspects of what people traditionally thought of as MDM are more important when you're in B2B, for example, or in kind of in e-commerce, Whereas, traditionally I would say MDM is kind of the core identity of product and tended to be from the kind of the start of a product's life cycle with identifiers and classifications and integrations to logistics and ERP platforms. Whereas PIM, certainly in my experience, has always been more focused around the selling channels. So it's around kind of enrichment of product data for catalogs and e-com. SEO, product descriptions, all that kind of thing, and even pricing more recently.
Yes.
I mean, an analogy I saw quite recently was like where MDM is kind of a product's birth certificate and its core identity, and PIM is more of its professional profile. It's like how it presents itself to the outside world.
That's a very interesting analogy, and I think would make a lot of things clearer for a lot of different people. Do you think but there are a lot of solutions which are positioned purely as MDM solutions? For example, I think there's something called Rialto. If you look around MDM solutions, there are quite vast variety of MDM solutions, whereas typically a lot of PIM solutions are quite different space when you talk about in terms of software solutions. So do you think both of them can coexist, and how do you go about deciding what is the right solution for your business?
Well, I think they definitely can coexist, and I think that and they should coexist as well, because I think if you look at a retail or a wholesale business end to end, I mean, they're all in it for the same thing. Ultimately, it's to source product, buy product at one price and sell it and make a profit.
Yes.
Now, if you're moving product through your business, you need to have a lot more of that core information, core MDM type information, which is about how do you source the product, how do you store it, transport it, all the kind of dimensions, pallet dimensions, how do we deal with this product through the business and make sure we can distribute it effectively. And ultimately, when you're selling it, it's then how you present it effectively through your selling channels, whether that's e-commerce, mobile apps, catalogs, and so on. And there are different focuses through that product life cycle. Nobody can kind of get away from that. If you're dealing with product, then your buying team need to have certain information to buy a product. The supply chain and the logistics need information to be able to bring it into a warehouse and put it away and pick it and ship it out, distribute it to stores or to customers. So I think, these things do coexist. Whether it's really necessary to distinguish them within an organization I suppose, is kind of a moot point, because, at the end of the day, it's about data management for your
True.
products end to end, isn't it?
Yep.
So whether you call it product MDM internally and you have one or multiple systems, does it really matter? Ultimately, we're all about
Absolutely.
effectively managing product data from end to end to deliver the right products to our customers at the right price at the right time, and then not get them returned because we've described them incorrectly or they don't
Absolutely.
meet
Yeah, yeah.
specification.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, one more element or the aspect of the MDM is that MDM sits at a much broader view where potentially, you could be maintaining a separate customer record. So that could also potentially sit in your MDM. You could
Yes,
be having your
absolutely. Yeah.
suppliers also sitting in your MDM. You could have various other aspects sitting inside your MDM. So which basically becomes your whole data map of your organizations, irrespective of what kind of record you are maintaining, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And from that perspective, yes, MDM, I suppose, could have a much broader implication. And people tend to start with one domain, they start with product. And then
Correct.
they'll go, oh, actually, yeah, we need to do this for location and supplier and fixed assets. And, depending on the type of business, it could be.
Exactly.
But but then if you go to the kind of the PIM end of the scale and say, well, we still need to understand our customers to sell to them.
Yeah.
We still need to be able to capture some supplier information to be able to kind of determine where the product came from, where do we return it to, how do we deal with warranties, product recalls, and that kind of thing. So there are elements of it, but it's kind of, for me, going back to that original point, MDM is much more about has traditionally been much more about the internal view of a product for a business, with PIM being the kind of customer facing or selling, the kind of marketing copy, sales copy, imagery, product descriptions to actually sell. And that's become more and more, I suppose the split has become more and more obvious over the years as the swing to kind of e-commerce.
Yes.
From bricks and mortar. In the old days, people would walk into a shop in the high street. Oh, some people still do, but you walk in and you see a product and you don't really need it to be described in great detail, because you can actually see it. You can walk into see a couple of washing machines side by side and you can go, yeah, I can see the size of it, the color of it. I can take my tape measure and measure it, and I can see the drum capacity and the spin speed and things like that. But if you're buying it online, more and more people now are buying things that they've never actually seen. You're going purely on a description and imagery and so on a website, and that's where the kind of the selling information, e-commerce is basically somebody's shop window.
Yes.
And that's the only experience people have get of a product before it arrives on their doorstep. The courier delivers it, and you're like, oh yeah, it doesn't actually look like it did in the picture, and it wasn't described this way. Whereas,
absolutely. So another very interesting question, what I wanted to understand was, at what point do you think a business can justify the investment into an MDM alongside a PIM? Or if there is a specific order you think it is to selecting, let's say, because selling is always more important than the internal management, right? So people would obviously prefer being PIM being more customer facing side of it. They would prefer to make more investment which are bringing quicker ROIs, right? So they would prefer to do PIM first. So what has your experience been, and how have you navigated those decision-making processes?
I think it depends. There's a lot on where you are with your business and where your biggest pain points are, I suppose. And if you've got an established business that's operating, and actually what your focus is around selling channels and improving basket size, revenue, kind of expanding your customer base through your selling channels, then PIM might be a good place to start. If you've already established, you're selling through stores and so on, then actually you're kind of wanting to expand your online presence, then you may already have good quality and internal data to actually manage your products through the business. So you're bringing products into your warehouse. You've got all your kind of core product data and logistics information, core legal and regulatory information all up to date. Then maybe PIM is the right focus. If you've got core data quality problems in actually operating your business, key missing regulatory information, and we all know across all the industries there's more and more legislation coming in all the time where you've got to actually track products and keep records of all the certifications and so on. Now, those kind of things.
Batch number, everything around that.
Yeah. And I suppose internal integrations, if you've got issues with integrating product data between internal or third parties, whether if you're using dropship, for example, or using aggregators to source data from, bringing that kind of information in, then maybe, the focus needs to be more on the MDM, getting that core product data right first before you kind of, pretty it up and get it out to sales. But as you rightly said, though, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your product information is. If it's not in your selling channels, you're not selling it. So, so you could say, well, I've got perfect information, all my weights and dimensions are correct, and all the core product identifiers are correct. But until I can actually get it to my selling channels, then that's money invested in stock that I'm not getting a return on. So,
yes, indeed. Absolutely. No, that makes so much sense. And I'm sure a lot of people will find this very valuable. Okay, now coming to your overall PIM experience, implementation and everything, what challenges did you address primarily as part of your PIM implementation projects? And are there any success stories or war stories that you might be willing to share? Anything, without going to very specifics?
I think the biggest, every project I've worked on has had some common themes.
Yeah.
Things that, you can come across time and time again. And I think they also have had some different challenges, everyone. And that's kind of why there's no project, I think, that could say that was the best one or that was the worst one. I've learned something new on all of them, because everyone is potentially a new industry, new sector. Technologies change, legislation changes, new things like AI have come into play, more recently. So the things that come up time and time again are data models and attributes and hierarchies, and the complexity of dealing with different product types and thousands of attributes, and making sure that you can actually capture the right attributes in a consistent way for each product type. Data migration is also a huge one. Many projects have worked on. I suppose a few years ago, there was almost kind of a trend of people buying MDM or PIM solutions because it was the thing to do. It's like, we need to have one because everyone else has got one.
It's the in thing.
Yeah. So it's almost like people were going out and buying, the fancy toolbox. We've got all the tools now to do the job, and then they expect it was almost like we can wave a magic wand and it'll fix all our data. And there were I had quite a few projects where they would implement, big, tool like Informatica, Stebo Step, Pimberley, so. And then after, as an afterthought, almost, to go, okay, so we've got to get our data into the platform now.
How do we do that?
But they hadn't really thought beforehand about where is our data, what state is it in. There's almost this mythical perception that we just get the data in there and, it's all fixed and we can send it to whoever we want and it's all working. But so quite a few projects got stalled early on just because we had that. We can design a data model, we can configure your PIM platform. Now we need all of your existing product data.
Yeah.
And this comes up every project. It becomes an issue because you start to look at, okay, where is our data? Is it in ERP platforms? Is it in spreadsheets? Is it in?
Yes.
Do we even have it? This is stuff we haven't got yet. And then you look in the legacy platforms. Sorry?
Spread across various shared drives.
Exactly.
Each department's own drive location.
Exactly. And then when you look at it and you find it, you realize actually they all conflict anyway. It's like this attribute says A here, but it says B there, which is the source we should be using. So I think that's kind of one of my big experience of any PIM or MDM implementation. Prepare your data or do kind of a maturity assessment before you embark on it. Get yourself ready to do it. Make sure you're ready to migrate your data. Think carefully about hierarchies and attributes. Prepare up front for kind of to be able to scale. Don't just kind of rush to throw data in there and then think, yeah, we'll sort that later. Because a lot of projects I've seen as well, people end up with effectively moving the same old rubbish to a new place. It's like, we've...
Yeah. I hear that a lot of times. We'll sort that out later.
Yeah.
And you really have
we've got the project budget, we've got the time scale, we need to get this in.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll leave that. We'll sort that out. Yeah. Make it out of scope and we'll deal with it later. Yeah.
And it's very difficult to resist that temptation to just get it in so that you can sign off the project and move on. But the thing is, the moment you start giving into that temptation of just getting it out of the way, it is never going to change there.
Well, yeah, and it comes back to bite later because
yes,
inevitably there's going to be some questions around benefits realization.
Yes.
And traditionally, PIM and MDM Solutions, MDM especially, has always been seen as it's an IT data
correct
thing. This is not business owned, it's an IT thing because it's all data. And then somebody later on will question, we spent X million pounds on our MDM platform implementation.
Yep.
Where's the benefit? It just seems to have absorbed more resource because you've made us put in place data governance and data stewards and data quality council and things like that. But where is the benefit? So, I mean, that's another point you were talking about earlier is how do you kind of justify implementing PIM or MDM in the first place?
Correct.
And how do you measure it? So that's something else you need to think about up front. But what is this actually going to deliver? Can we identify some pain points right now, some specific things that we need to improve from a business perspective, business KPIs, whether that's increased spend, customer spend, reduced operational costs, reduced returns, but actually work out how do we measure the current state and how do we measure the improvements and how do we focus on our PIM or MDM project on what matters to deliver that and not just to be, well, we're just going to put all the data in there and stick some workflows on there and add some governance and hope that we get some improvement. So
you've mentioned a very good point, Mark. What I've seen is a lot of times people struggle to define their success criteria or the success KPI for any of these kind of project implementations. What has been your process and what are those typical benchmarks or KPIs that you define through these processes to eventually say, okay, our project was successful or we achieved the objective that we set out on? What exactly were those objectives? Because otherwise, a lot of times people end up just defining it very subjectively and struggle to quantify it and report it back to the management.
Yeah. Well, I think it is varied across different projects and also on whether it's a kind of a PIM or MDM focused project. But I think with my experience working with the business as opposed to just working in a technical role, I've always tried to focus to kind of speak with business representatives, stakeholders, whether that's through supply chain or commercial category teams or people are dealing with merchandising, web merchandising, things like that, to actually understand what are their pain points. And I've even, when I was working with Stebo, one of my roles was kind of as advisory services. And part of that was to actually work with businesses to understand what are we going to get out of this and how do we measure it and to look at. And it could, sometimes there were things like legal requirements. I worked with a CPG or food retailer actually, who were having challenges around food labeling regulations, to actually label for fats, carbohydrates, salts, allergens, and things like that. So there's a regulatory thing there. So you could actually look. I took some examples and said, look, on your website, you've got these products and you've got incorrect data on there. So
that could lead to a lot of.
This is important from your point of view, from a legal standpoint.
Yep.
You can take examples on people's websites where just product descriptions are wrong or specification data is wrong or missing, or for example, they don't have cross sells or upsells, or you're buying a cordless electric drill, for example. There's a good chance when you're buying it that you might actually want some drill bits, or you might want a spare battery or a case, or those kind of things. Now all these opportunities can be kind of
utilized,
developed through a PIM implementation. traditionally people didn't deal with this kind of thing in an ERP platform. People didn't link products together and go, these are compatible, these are accessories, these are cross sells. And to a large extent, even now, manufacturers don't provide that information in a good format to use. So actually focusing on some of these things from a business perspective, looking at it and go, well, actually, you can improve your basket size. You could actually improve your conversion rate by describing things completely, because especially in a technical industry, we've talked about construction and DIY, quite often or almost always you're buying products based on to fit a specific need. The specification is critical. Now, if I want to go and buy, I don't know, a toilet flush valve, for example, I want to know what's the thread size, is it plastic or brass, and what's the overall dimensions of the product.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm not going to buy it and go, I think I'll prefer the blue one over the pink one. It needs to be specified correctly. So if you get that information right, people will buy it and they won't return it because you've actually described it. They know they've bought the right thing.
So potentially the thing is that, the KPIs success criteria could be defined in terms of capturing the potential loss of opportunity, legal compliance, and improving efficiencies, which could potentially be measured over a period of time. Is that correct?
Yeah. Absolutely. And even things like just time to market for products, how long does it take you? How long does it take you from deciding to source a product to actually getting it available for sale on your website?
Yep.
Or potentially even worse, how long does it take from when it arrives in your warehouse to getting it on sale, because you've already invested the cash in that stock and it's taking up space in your warehouse and you're insuring it and it's going out of date. But if you can't get it onto your website, then you're losing sales.
Absolutely.
And that's even more important in things like high fashion, where potentially you're competing, you've got a short season of 13 weeks or something like that for product. Your competitors are all listing product before you've got it online. You've missed out on sales. And I've worked with retailers in the past who've ended up with kind of vendors coming back and taking inventory off them because they haven't got it on sale quick enough.
Yes. I think in the overall wholesale industry, stock availability is the king. Whosoever has the stock has the sale.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that is the key indeed. Now, coming to the next part, it just struck me. Your company's name is also MDM3. Were you inspired by the MDM Solutions to keep it like that, or was there some other story behind that?
No, it came about because of our experience in master data management.
Brilliant, brilliant. So the origin is actually in the MDM solution.
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant.
And it's not just products. We've worked in, as you already mentioned, we've worked in other domains as well, in customer and supplier MDM, location MDM.
Of course, that has been your life pretty much, and hence the name of the company. Now, when you've got large volume catalogs, of course, in the power tools DIY space, typically the catalogs are, of course, majority of the times upwards of 250K, 500,000, maybe 1 million SKUs. How do you ensure data quality and standardization across all of these elements, this high volume of SKUs? How do you ensure that? How do you monitor it? How do you track? How do you report on it?
Well, I think it comes down to a number of things. I think one of the key things is building kind of the data validation.
Yes.
To start with, data validation at point of entry, and making sure that what you bring into the system is robust and the attributes are properly defined with if you things with lists of values, making sure that they're not just free text entries, so you have consistent data. Automation, I think, is a key one as well. Automate as much as you can early to support scalability. What might work well as a manual process for a few thousand products, when you've scaled it to, you said, like hundreds of thousands or millions.
The dynamics change dramatically.
You can't do that. You can't do that on spreadsheets and so on.
No, of course.
I think it's crucial that that you understand what your processes are to start with before you scale up. You can't automate something unless you know how to do it properly anyway. And I think that's key. Having kind of good data governance, but not too onerous to start with, and focus on criticality. So that actually, what are the key legal and regulatory attributes and business critical attributes and those kind of things. Make sure you've got clear ownership for those up front, so that as you scale, you can actually monitor the right things and not overwhelm people with things that are just kind of nice to have, some of the kind of more descriptive and less critical stuff. There's always attributes. You can kind of break your attributes down into kind of the core business critical stuff and legal and regulatory stuff versus this is value add versus kind of the fluffy stuff that
Typically,
you're nice
this
to have.
responsibility. This is a very interesting element that you mentioned, Mark. With whom does this responsibility sits to define what is essential, what is nice to have? I mean, we typically use in the software world something called Moscow. You know, must have. I'm sure you're very well aware of.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, with whom, with what role or department does this responsibility sits to define that kind of a thing?
Well, I think ultimately the ownership of these things lies with the business stakeholders. But I think it's important to kind of build a cross-functional team because, again, as we talked about earlier, you've got a long life cycle from kind of product sourcing, ideation sourcing through to, selling it to the customer.
Receiving to selling and serving as well after
And
sales.
serving beyond that, yeah. And different people have different priorities and different interests throughout that supply chain. So, if you go to somebody whose job is merchandising on a website and ask them how important pallet barcode and pallet configuration and tie high information is, they'll go, not relevant to me. I don't care about that. So, you have to make sure you've got stakeholders representing the whole of that supply chain who have a say in what is important.
Yep.
And I've seen some horrific examples of this where, buying teams have done the absolute minimum to be able to place an order with a supplier to get a product into the business. And then the product arrives at the warehouse and the dimensions are all, they're all in there as ones, for example, length, width and height, one, weight, one. And so then the warehouse managers, well, I can't put this away because the system is now saying it'll fit in any of the spaces. So I think the criticality, you've got to have representatives from supply chain, commercial, merchandising, potentially a QA.
Yes, very critical.
QA will say, these are legal and regulatory attributes, and there are critical things that have to be captured. In the DIY construction industry, you've got products that are hazardous that require safety data sheets. You've got age-restricted products like knives and so on, and those kind of things. You can't get those wrong, and you can't put yourself in a position of selling a product that's unsafe, or you're selling it to a person that shouldn't have it. So those kind of things are critical. But again, you've got to have the right people involved from the business team to actually say, no, that absolutely is mandatory, and it can only be one of these values, and we need to define that up front. So defining your whole kind of product data model
and product
up
life
front and deciding what's mandatory and what point, not just mandatory as in it has to be filled in, but at what point in that product life cycle it's important.
That
because
different
again, to buy a product, you wouldn't fill an SEO description to buy a product.
Correct. So different attributes or different properties become relevant at different stages of the product.
Yes.
So what you're suggesting is that firstly, your product life cycle has to be defined thoroughly, right from the point of making a decision to source it or buy this or add it to your offerings, to the point of actually buying it, getting it into the warehouse, and then potentially merchandising it, selling it, and after sales service as well. Defining all these stages are very critical.
Yes.
And then you build your data model according to your life cycle.
Yes. And then you build a workflow or simple workflows over the top of that to make sure that you capture the right information at the right point in that life cycle.
Yep. No, absolutely. That is such a golden piece of information, actually. I don't think a lot of people put a lot of thought into it. There is majority of the times what I've seen is there are these long meetings that are sat through by 15, 20 people, out of which a lot of them are just checklist managers. So I'll prefer to call and do not contribute much, rather add a bit more overwhelming aspect to the projects. Has that been somewhere in your experience as well?
I have had experiences like that, like where we spent days sat in a room with people just going through lists. Yeah, build a long list of attributes and then say, yeah, right, can you go along and configure those, please? And I think even the kind of the naming of attributes here
is very important.
Doing that consistently. It's one thing getting it right inside your organization, but every supplier potentially describes things slightly differently.
Yes.
The course, an attribute, something slightly different. They maybe use a different unit of measure.
Yes. And they would probably be maintaining a separate taxonomy altogether compared to yours. How do you align these diverse taxonomies, especially if you're buying products from multiple suppliers, sourcing them? How do you align on those fronts, or do you just ignore the supplier's taxonomy and just focus more on the product side of it?
Well, I think there's a number of ways you can tackle it. Depends how much clout you've got with your suppliers, for one thing.
Of course. Of course.
But generally, you're always going to get suppliers. They will work with their own internal system and
Of
what
course.
they call attributes. There are a number of initiatives across quite a few different sectors to standardise on some things. We've got like the BMF, the Builders Merchants Federation, are creating a standardised template for product induction. There's also BOSS within stationery. They have templates for certain attributes, but they tend to focus on a core set of attributes and not the hundreds of other kind of what we might call category-specific or product-specific attributes. And so I don't think any retailer or wholesaler is ever going to be in a position to dictate to suppliers and manufacturers what everything should be called.
Yep.
And even if they could, it's like, well, the next retailer is going to come along and go,
yes,
that's not what I call it. So in my experience, you can either go, well, we'll only ask for certain information and we'll ask for it in this form. We'll send them a template and you fill it in. But by doing that, you severely restrict what you can capture. And you see this especially in really technical products, DIY, for example. Look at a cordless drill. There might be dozens of technical specification attributes that you want to capture that are quite important, especially when somebody is doing a comparison between products online. And again, they've not seen the product. They're just going, oh, should I buy this one or that one? They'll look at the maximum drilling depth in metal and the torque and all that kind of thing. Is it got electronic brake? Now, those kind of things, you want to capture that information because it's crucial for purchasing. So if you give a supplier a template and go, well, here's 30 attributes that I need and you must call them that, you're automatically discounting all that other information that the supplier might have.
Absolutely.
So in my eyes, you want to capture as much as possible. So you almost need to have the ability to take, this is what the vendor or the manufacturer calls it, we bring it in, and then we map it to what we want to present it as.
And we transform that data in whatever form and shape we want it to be.
Exactly, yeah. And that could be just through having lots of aliases going, well...
Yes.
I've had examples of electronics distributors where they're buying from manufacturers HP and Lenovo and so Dell and things like that, and you'll see on things like laptops, one will call it the screen size, one will call it display diagonal, one will call it display size. Some of them may do it in millimeters, some may do it in inches.
Absolutely, inches. Yeah, some referred that to in inches. So you have to set up all those. Firstly, attribute transformation, and then also the attribute data transformation as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
if you don't do that internally, when you present that information to your customers, it's very difficult for them to compare products.
Exactly.
It's very difficult for you even to allow them to kind of filter and facet products on the website. If you display,
standardize it.
Yeah, I've got 20 laptops that are 15 inch, and I've got 20 laptops that are 320 millimeters.
Yes.
Customers, how do I compare these things? What is 320? Is that bigger than 15 inches?
Absolutely. And this is why your data standardization policy has to be in place and much before you start doing your whole data migration.
Yep. And it's one thing doing that for new products coming in, but it's also,
legacy data.
Going back to the data migration, all that legacy data that's coming from different legacy systems, again, is not consistent, and trying to get that into a state to migrate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, Mark,
especially when you've applied new validation rules in your PIM system that your own data doesn't meet.
Yeah, and puts your data in a separate staging shady box.
Indeed.
And throughout all of these project implementations, I'm sure you must have gone through various conflicts between the IT or the tech team and the business team. What were those typical conflicts that you came across, and how did you navigate through them or bring the teams on board? No matter what you do, I've seen there is always some level of conflict between the two sides of the business.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, that. I think a lot of it still comes down to this, having cross-functional teams early in a project, involving people and getting them to take some ownership, and almost being kind of, there to arbitrate in some of the difficult discussions. I mean, ultimately, certainly in my view, the business has to own the product data.
Yep.
If you don't have that, kind of, you're starting out on a bad footing with trouble ahead.
Yes.
So by getting the ownership from the business and that focus on business KPIs and metrics, and making sure that things that you do and the way you structure the data and the things that you capture, what's important, always has, is having the back of your mind, what does this actually deliver from a business perspective? Does it allow us to sell more product, or prevent, returns, or prevent reputational damage from, not describing products correctly? And ultimately, those things should trump anything that kind of comes from a technical or IT
Absolutely.
challenge. I mean, a lot of the IT challenges come down to we can't do that with the data.
Yes.
You want real time integration to your front end, and we can't deliver that. Or you're asking for data structures that we can't support because you want, this kind of these matrices of, these attributes are valid on this product but only on a Tuesday, and all that kind of thing. So a lot of the IT challenges do come from the kind of the technology and integration perspective. But I think if you're implementing a new platform, if you're implementing a Stebo Step or an Akenia or whatever kind of PIM platform, ultimately you've got to have somebody around who knows that very well, and has not just knows what the platform's capable of, but actually has seen the challenges in the past and can come along with here's a selection of options to get around this, because there's always multiple options, there's always multiple solutions with these things, and to be able to talk with IT and business and go, we've got to have a solution to this. What can we make work? And it might not be the perfect solution for everybody.
Yeah.
Generally, so there's most PIM and MDM platforms are actually, I think, as I said earlier, it's kind of a toolbox. You've got a flexible data model.
Yes.
You've got some workflows, and you've got integrations. You can get data in and out of it, and then internally, you've got various kind of dashboards, metrics to actually what we've put in there. Can we analyze what we need to do with it? Can we improve the quality of it? Can we maintain the quality of it? And can we get it out to where it needs to be? So ultimately, that's all
they all do.
Gather data, enrich it, manage its quality, and then give it to someone else to do, because they're not transactional systems. Ultimately, that data's got to go to an ERP, an e-com platform, a catalog production site, or, affiliate shopping feeds or something like that. So the technical aspects of it are, by putting the components together in different ways, you can quite often deliver the same thing. And you might have something that's, more performant or more robust or more technical, but it's always a balance between kind of what the existing resources within the organization can support, what are their technical skills, what are they willing to put in terms of like a BAU team to manage the solution once it's live, versus, is it just going to go to be supported by IT?
Yeah, no, of course, because I think in the long term, the sustainability is very important. Putting a fancy solution which business can't use or support, I think it's not going to go a very long way. Now, we've just started to scratch the surface, but I don't want to make this a very, very long episode for people. So I think, Mark, what we'll do is we'll do another episode in some more time, sometime in future. For now, I just want to close this one on two things. One, how do you see the future for AI in the PIM world? And secondly, what advice would you like to give to somebody who's starting on their PIM or MDM journey at this stage in life in their business, if they're just starting off?
Okay, well, starting with AI, I mean, it's something that really, really excites me. I think there are some massive opportunities. In some ways, we've kind of gone through, if you remember back in the 90s, we had the kind of the first .com wave where everyone was like, you need to have a website, and nobody really thought about the whole back end of fulfillment and so on. And
yes,
I think we've kind of had a few of the gimmicks and gadgets in AI so far, where people have just been like, we need to show something, we've got to have AI in our product, but doesn't actually have any substance behind it.
That's behind it.
But I think now, the AI models are starting to mature. People are starting to understand how to use them more, rather than just query into ChatGPT, but to actually use the model, the LLMs properly. I think there's several areas. One is on kind of content creation and enrichment. An area particularly, for selling, takes a lot of time to write good copy and to incorporate good technical information into that copy to make it SEO rich. Whereas AI models now, you can maintain your tone of voice through it. You can have accurate information brought together. If you've got specification data, you can actually generate good copy. And I think most people would agree, it's much better to have something to start to review and edit than it is to start with a blank sheet of paper and try and write copy.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I think
Absolutely.
generating content, definitely one. Categorization of products, to actually go through products and say, even using something like UNSPSC or GPC
Yes.
categorization.
Yeah.
So look, I've got a batch of products here. They all share similar characteristics. Get AI to work through them and go, well, these are grouped together because they all have the same similar characteristics.
Yeah.
So I suggest they
So
should be categorized as such.
potentially, because a lot of times I've seen is when you've got a large catalogs, the taxonomy is all messed up because the categories are assigned by whosoever is doing that category assignment at the time of the product creation, and it rarely gets changed. So as people change, the categorization logic is not consistent or standard across the board. It's very rare that I've seen it to be completely standard.
Yeah. I think there's also a big area around data quality.
Yeah.
Now you can put rules in, you can put validation rules in up front to capture data. You can put in kind of cross validation between attributes and so on. But I think deciding what those rules are and implementing them
Yes.
is quite a tough task.
Absolutely.
But AI can definitely help with that. And even looking at things like groups of products, for example, I've got 30 cordless power drills. 28 of them have got a weight between 1.5 and 2 kilograms, but 2 of them have got 15 kilograms. And it's those kind of things that
Yep.
to actually go through and look and go, does this look sensible, and flag things up to people to review. And they might go, oh, actually, yeah, that is correct because that one is different in some way. But those kind of things of thinking of what to actually look for, especially when it comes to cross attribute matching, if you've got
Yes.
things like voltage, amperage, and wattage, those things are linked together. If you've got values that are either missing or inconsistent, pallet weight versus individual weights, you say, well, on a pallet, I've got 168 items.
Yes.
The pallet weight is 3 tons, but each item only weighs 35 grams. And it's like all of those kind of things. You can get AI to kind of crunch through massive amounts of data quickly and suggest things that need to be looked at from a data governance or data quality perspective.
Absolutely. That makes so much perfect sense. I mean, there is so much of buzz around it, but I don't think people have yet figured out the right approach or the right use cases. Of course, there are a lot of every new company, there are probably hundreds of companies coming up every day doing something in the AI space. And what I think is every company is doing a microservice. They're solving one small problem, which makes it very difficult for businesses to adopt, let's say, 20 AI solutions and then bring them all together.
Yes. It's not just bringing them together, but it's also the cost because every one of them is, they've got a
Exactly.
cost associated with it. Yeah.
Exactly. So integrating them, onboarding them, and I think this is going to lead to a explosion of the AI solutions. And eventually, I believe there's going to be a huge amount of consolidation. A lot of this will go down, but a lot of, like you said, substantial companies with substance are going to survive this whole AI wave, just like a lot of companies survived the .com and the companies evolved into mature models.
Yeah. I think as well as not just on the product data, there's big opportunities around kind of service and managing kind of customer relationships, especially in B2B as well, where you can actually bring together product catalogs. A lot of manufacturers still produce tech data sheets, data sheets, to logs with lots of specification information in. That's quite hard to digest.
Yep.
Now there's AI tools that can pull all that information out and consolidate it into a knowledge base. So when you're dealing with contact centers, for example, they can very quickly ask a question and get an answer back. Somebody says, oh, will this particular product meet my needs? Is it fire rated, or is it
Absolutely.
safety use in this type of
Of
environment?
course. Yeah, and of course, I think, Mark, I think we could really go on. That the conversation is, I'm thoroughly enjoying the conversation, but I think we'll do this next time, one more episode to cover more aspects and go a little deeper into it. For now, just one last question. The closing thought is, what advice would you give to anybody who's just starting on their PIM journey or MDM and looking for some advice, practical advice?
I think one thing I've always said to people is and it is a cliche term, I say, but don't boil the ocean.
Yeah.
Start with some key business priorities, and pick something that you can get a win from, because
Yep.
otherwise you could end up going down a rabbit hole and not realizing a benefit and not getting continued buy-in to kind of scale up and scale out. So I think identify some quick wins, some small pieces that you can deliver on. As an example, one of the things we recently did, I know we've talked about this with one of my clients, they sell workwear, but they weren't grouping products together as you would expect to buy. Fashion products now, if you're buying boots, you want to be able to choose color and size.
Color and
If
size.
you're buying trousers, you want
Yes.
color, waist size, leg length.
Yes.
And they were just displaying a list of products on the product list page. So
Wow.
quick win there just from a customer experience. And it's proved, by using their PIM solution to properly group products together, variant products, they've seen the benefit. Brilliant. I think so. Identify some kind of key business wins where you can get stakeholders involved early on and demonstrate real benefit realization and benefit delivery from it. I've seen a lot of projects that have just fizzled out because the business actually stopped sponsoring them because they just
couldn't find the value.
It becomes it's a data project. We're just plowing money into data, but we don't see any benefit on the bottom line.
I completely understand, and I've seen quite a few of them myself.
Yeah. Mark, and I think one of the other things is getting data governance in place earlier on as well. And not onerous, over-the-top data governance, but ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Try and get a kind of a product data manager. If you're working on product, get somebody who can act as that kind of arbitrator across the business teams. Build up champions within your different business teams, your category managers, QA, supply chain, and so on, but have somebody who actually has that eye on the ball from a data quality point of view. Are we doing things generally in terms of our process and our data models and so on that are improving data, or is it just stagnating and we're going to have the same problem in 2 years' time because when the project's finished, it's not going to be maintained?
Have key KPIs defined and monitor them on a regular basis is basically.
Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't need to be a huge, we don't need to have huge data governance structures with people recruited into these roles, but
somebody should do that.
And keeping those champions within the teams as well, engaging them and actually getting them to understand from a business point of view why we're doing this and what it delivers by showing them
the benefits.
As I mentioned earlier, the examples on the website, I'm looking at this from a customer and this could be much better, as opposed to here's a spreadsheet of your data, you need to fill these blanks in.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, Mark. I think it's been absolutely wonderful. And we will definitely have to do one more episode covering, let's say we could talk about PIM in the B2B space, other challenges around the B2B, because your experience spans in that space as well. So let's plan another one. But for this one, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
I did, yeah. It was really, really good. I could talk all day about this stuff, so, and I probably waffled on quite a lot on some areas, but it would be really good to do another one. No, I enjoy talking about it, and more than anything as well, it kind of brings back some of the memories of things that I've worked on and some of the challenges, which, when you're bogged down in day-to-day work, you don't think about some of those things.
Absolutely. Like they say, should take a pause, smell the roses on the way before it's all gone. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. And I am sure anybody who's listening to this podcast would enjoy the conversation as much both of us enjoyed. We will surely record another episode, go further deep dive into the B2B side of it, more aspects of the PIM MDM element. Thank you so much.